Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board on the 30th of January, 2024. Seeing quorum in the room, I would like to call our meeting to order, acknowledging that this meeting is taking place on the unceded and unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Algonquin Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin people for their enduring stewardship of this land on which we live and learn. And I ask that in our meeting, we be mindful of our responsibility to honor our commitment to truth and reconciliation as we make decisions in service to our students and community. In accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, does any board member have an interest to declare? Seeing none, I would like to move to the report from Committee of the Whole in camera. Vice Chair Milburn, would you please present your report?
The board met as the Committee of the Whole in camera this evening and reports and recommends as follows: that staff proceed as directed in the Committee of Whole in camera with respect to a labor relations matter, that the tentative settlement between the OCDSB and OCETFO, which will form a collective agreement dated September 1st, 2022 to August 31st, 2026 be ratified, that staff proceed as directed in Committee of the Whole in camera with respect to a labor relations matter, and that staff proceed as directed in Committee of the Whole in camera with respect to a legal matter.
Thank you very much. We have held our debates on these motions in camera and have given each of them careful consideration. So we will now vote on them all. Can we do them together or in sequence? So on the first motion, if we could have that on the screen, I will ask Manager Guthrie to please open the vote. And I hope that everybody has their e-scribe ready to register their vote. And we have a result for our first motion regarding a labor relations matter. 11 votes in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. The motion is carried. Could we please do the second motion then? This is the ratification motion. And this motion also has been approved. 11 in favor, none opposed, and no abstentions. And I would like to take this moment to say thank you very much to the negotiating teams, both on the part of board staff for OCDSB and those also participating on behalf of the Ottawa-Carleton Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. Well done, everybody. If we can move on then to the third motion, which is the other relations, labor relations matter. And again, we have a result. The motion is carried, 11 in favor, none opposed, and no abstentions. And on the fourth and final recommendation from in camera. And again, we have the result on this recommendation regarding a legal matter with 8 votes in favor, 2 opposed, and 1 abstention. Is there anything else from your report, Vice Chair Milburn?
Not at this time, but I am getting word that our live stream might not be up. Just an FYI. Apologies. Thank you.
So if we may proceed, next up is approval of the agenda for this evening. Do we have a mover for the agenda? Trustee Lyra, thank you. Seconded by Trustee Lee. Is there any discussion on the agenda? And seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of the agenda as presented? And opposed? And the motion is carried. Which brings us to the briefing from the chair. And I'm pleased to tell you that last week I had an opportunity to present on behalf of the board to the Provincial Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs. This presentation was a part of the OCDSB's efforts to advocate for fair funding for public education in the 2024 Ontario budget. In my remarks, I spoke about increased needs for student needs for special education, support for mental health, rising costs for student transportation, the need to maintain and build schools and make efficient use of our existing facilities, the growing need for cybersecurity, and the need to cover the costs of replacing staff who are away on sick leave and short-term disability leaves. My full remarks, together with supplemental information, are available on the OCDSB website. Also, with February nearly upon us, I wanted to highlight the annual Toonie Tuesday fundraising campaign, culminating on February the 27th by the Education Foundation of Ottawa. The funds raised will support the Foundation's vital work to help OCDSB students in need. Between now and February 27th, there are a variety of ways to donate. For more information, please check out what was shared in last week's updates to students, staff, and families, or visit the Education Foundation website to support their efforts. And finally, a reminder that the OCDSB is still seeking an Indigenous community member to serve as an alternate member on the Special Education Advisory Committee, better known as SEAC. I'm looking forward to the appointment of an Indigenous representative later in this meeting to advocate for the interests of Indigenous students with special education needs. But it would be wonderful to have a second representative who can ensure then that there's always an Indigenous voice at SEAC meetings. The deadline to apply for the second position has been extended until February the 29th. And that is all my briefing tonight. Are there any questions? Seeing none, that goes to the director's briefing. Mr. Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, good evening, everyone. In February, we will be marking Black History Month. It's an opportunity to celebrate Black culture and history and applaud the achievements and significant contributions of Black Canadians that they've made to this country, not only in February, but throughout the course of the entire year. On Saturday, February 24th, specifically, the OCDSB Family and Community Engagement Team will host an event to honor Black excellence in the late afternoon, early evening. The Black History Showcase will be held at Longfield's Davidson Heights Secondary School. It will include panel discussions and performances by students and staff, as well as community members. To register for this free event, please visit our website. Last weekend, Black History Ottawa held a reception to present their annual Community Builder Awards. I am proud to share that the OCDSB was recognized with the President's Award at the ceremony. This was in relation to our involvement with the Ubuntu Collective project and honored our community building work and efforts to create legacies worth preserving. There were 2 awards granted, one to the district as mentioned, and one to Executive Officer Michelle Giroux for her tremendous work as chair of the Ubuntu Collective. Congratulations, Michelle, and congratulations to everyone involved. A quick reminder that the student transfer application period for both elementary and secondary students runs from now until February 9th. It gives parents, guardians, and caregivers, if parents, guardians, and caregivers wish to have their child attend a school other than their designated school, visit our website to complete a student transfer application. Finally, I'd like to close with some exciting news. We were informed that Glebe Collegiate Institute student Danella Nduao has been selected as a 2000 Lorraine finalist. This is a tremendous achievement. Out of more than 5,200 applicants, Danella is part of a group of 90 young people selected as Lorraine finalists for the class of 2024. She will have an opportunity to travel to Toronto later in February to participate in national interviews for a chance to be named one of the 36 Lorraine Scholars. This is a prestigious honor awarded to young Canadians who demonstrate character, service, and leadership potential. Winners will also receive approximately $100,000 over 4 years of undergraduate study. We wish Danelle the best of luck and congratulate her on this accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions for the Director? Seeing none, that brings us to item 8 on our agenda, delegations. And this evening, we have one delegation from Ms. Andrea Chandler regarding representation of Zone 9 at board meetings. Ms. Chandler, welcome to our meeting. You have 4 minutes for your delegation, after which there might be up to 3 questions of clarification from trustees. And you will have about a minute to answer each of the questions if there are any. Please go ahead when you're ready and our staff will start the timer. Thank you.
Thank you for permission to speak at this meeting. I'm an Ottawa resident and taxpayer and a voter. I voted in municipal elections. I live in Zone 9, which is represented on the Board of Trustees by Dr. Neely Kaplan-Murth. Both my children attended Ottawa-Carleton District School Board school totality of their primary and secondary education. They're now in university. I'm writing to express my concerns as a Canadian citizen, Ottawa resident, and voter. My presence at this meeting today is in response to emails that I sent to Trustee Scott on January 18th and 23rd. As I understand it, the Board of Trustees voted on December 19th to sanction the trustee of Zone 9 for alleged violations of its code of conduct. If I understand correctly, the sanctions imposed on the trustee include barring her from 1 meeting, plus participation in committees for a period of time. The sanctions have a strong effect on the trustee's ability to advocate for her constituents, in my opinion. This means that constituents, in effect, are being penalized. It is not only the trustee that is impacted by sanctions. I'm here to express the view that the decision to sanction the trustee for Zone 9 has violated my rights, specifically my right to political representation, as determined through the process of Zone 9 residents voting, having the opportunity to vote in a school board election. If the trustee of Zone 9 has restrictions imposed on her ability to deliberate with the board, that would mean that, in effect, residents of Zone 9 do not enjoy the same rights as residents of other zones in Ottawa-Carleton. The notion of one person, one vote is one of the pillars of democratic values. I feel that Section 4.18D of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board Human Rights Policy tells us for something very important about school board process. According to this point, decisions made by the board need to weigh, quote, the constitutional values at stake. The matters at stake in the December 19th meeting then included matters that ought to be of grave concern to all elected officials that are entrusted with the responsibility to uphold democracy. The sanctions imposed on the trustee for Zone 9 mean that my ability to be represented is disadvantaged relative to residents of other wards for the sole reason of the geographic locale in which I live. Moreover, it means that I, along with other residents of Zone 9, which is, by the way, a very diverse and large area near the very center of Ottawa, we risk being penalized for the alleged conduct of another person. The constitutional values that we have in Canada include the right of citizens to vote, to enjoy equality under the law, and to be able to choose where they live. I choose to live in Zone 9 as a voter and taxpayer. I'm supposed to enjoy the same rights as a resident of any other zone in the district board. I do not believe that the board gave these serious questions the attention they deserved. There's another dimension of this issue that I find especially alarming. I watched online the section of the December 19th meeting at approximately the 1 hour 06 mark to 1 hour 11 mark. And the discussion raised the possibility that there could be future code of conduct allegations that could lead to further sanctions against the representative. Further sanctions against the trustee could mean that simply because I am a representative of Zone 9, I could be disadvantaged with respect to political representation indefinitely. I do not wish to raise questions about the alleged violations of the code of conduct What I argue here is that the code of conduct is flawed if a sanction on a trustee arbitrarily and disproportionately denies constituents.
Appreciate the comments, and there's lots to think about. As time goes on and we look to reconsider the code of conduct policy. I would just say, my initial thoughts on this is that the code of conduct is in line, is clearly aligned with the scheme of the Education Act, which requires boards to have code of conducts or codes of conduct, and also directs boards to include in those code of conduct sanctions, which include suspensions. I would also consider the fact that other parliamentary entities, including the Parliament of Canada, the House of Commons, permits members of parliaments, clearly individuals representing constituents, to be suspended for reasons of decorum by the Speaker of the House in the case of Parliament. But certainly lots to consider.
Thank you, Council Sinclair. And thank you again, Ms. Chandler, for taking the time to come this evening and share your concerns with us. Much appreciated. Moving on with our agenda then, we are at item 9, confirmation of the board minutes. Do we have a mover to confirm the minutes of our board meeting on the 19th of December, 2023, and also the minutes of our special board meeting on the 16th of January, 2024? Trustee Lyra, is there a seconder? Trustee Jenkins, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions in either of these sets of minutes? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of confirming both sets of minutes? And opposed, the motion is carried. And next, is there any business arising from the minutes of the 19th of December or the minutes of the 16th of January? And again, seeing none, I will move on to item 11, which is the report from Committee of the Whole from the 5th of December. Oh, sorry, not the 5th of December, from the 16th of January, 2024. Vice Chair Milburn, do you have your report from Committee of the Whole?
Apologies, just let me flip through.
And when you move receipt, if you would like, it might be helpful to move receipt for all of the 3 Committee of the Whole meetings that were held on the 16th of January.
Okay. I would now like to move receipt of the Committee of the Whole report for January 16th, 2024.
And the 2 special?
And the two special Committee of the Whole reports on January 16th, 2024, and also on January 16th, 2024.
And do we have a seconder for receipt? Trustee Dixon, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions in any of these reports? Seeing none, I will call the question on receipt. All those in favor and opposed, and that motion is carried. They are received. Back to you, Vice Chair Milburn.
All right. On a motion by Trustee Jenkins, which I will second, that the opening grade structure program offering an attendance boundary for the new Findlay Creek Elementary School be approved according to Appendix E to report number 24-004, that the revised attendance boundary for junior kindergarten to grade 6 for Vimy Ridge Public School be approved according to Appendix F to report number 24-004, to be implemented upon the opening of the new Findlay Creek Elementary School, that the grades 7 and 8 attendance boundary for Vimy Ridge Public School be approved as per Appendix G to report number 24-004, that all current junior kindergarten to grade 5 students that have been directed to Robert Bateman Public School as a result of the interim measures outlined in report number 22-037 be redirected to their home school upon opening of the new Findlay Creek Elementary School, and that the current grade 7 students attending the Roberta Bonder Public School as a result of the interim measures outlined in report number 22-037 be given a one-time option to remain at the school or attend Vimy Ridge Public School upon the opening of the new Finley Creek Elementary School.
Thank you, Chair Milburn, Vice Chair Milburn. Is this a consent item? And seeing that it is consent, does that also conclude your report?
Yes, it does, I believe.
Thank you very much. So seeing no objections to voting on this, we can take the vote immediately. Manager Guthrie, if you could please open the vote on the attendance boundaries for the new Finley Creek Elementary School. And the motion is carried, 11 in favor, none opposed, and no abstentions. Next item on our agenda, item 11.3, Report 24-022, Appointment of an Indigenous Community Representative to the Special Education Advisory Committee. Mr. Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to Executive Officer Giroux to discuss the matter of the appointment of the community representative to SEAC for a term of the 31st of January, 2024 through to the 14th of November, 2026.
Thank you. Through you, the report before you outlines the process. As you're aware, the Special Education Advisory Committee has an Indigenous community representative. And after a review process, Winnie Corn Miller is the recommended candidate. Her biography and background information was shared with trustees under separate cover. And we have reviewed the eligibility criteria. She is eligible. And we are recommending her appointment for a term ending the 14th of November, 2026.
Thank you. We have the report with the recommendation. Trustee Lyra, you wish to speak?
I'd be happy to move the recommendation.
And do we have a seconder for the recommendation? Trustee Presley, is there any discussion on the recommendation? Any introduction?
Very briefly, the Indigenous Education Council has recommended this person to us as their representative to the Special Education Committee. I think it is in our best interests to uphold the decision that they have recommended.
Anybody else? Trustee Presley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I've been privileged to take part in a few IAC meetings, and this is something that the council has been working very long and hard on, and I'm very happy that we will be moving forward with that today. Thank you, Trustee Lyra, for moving this forward. I'm so happy to support it.
Thank you. And any other speakers? Before we go to the vote, I'm just going to ask staff for clarification of one thing, which I think is perhaps a little murky here. And that is, my understanding is that this person is not a representative of the Indigenous Education Council. She is a representative of Indigenous families, children with special education needs. So not representing the council, but representing parents.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Giroux. So if we can open the vote, please, on this. And we have a result with the motion is carried with 10 in favor and none opposed and one abstention. Thank you all very much for that, and thank you very much for the report. Moving on, matters for information. Do we have a report from our OPSPA directors this evening? Trustee Jenkins?
Thank you, Chair. Last weekend, trustees from across Ontario, from school boards across Ontario, attended the Public Education Symposium in Toronto. Trustees had the opportunity to attend several workshops on topics including Indigenous language revitalization, food literacy and school food in Ontario, and digital media literacy, just to name a few. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know if there are any questions, but I hope that those who were in attendance will be willing to share any notes or other things that they have brought back with those trustees who were not able to attend. Moving on then, our next item is our board work plan, attached as always. And I'd just like to draw your attention to a couple of changes to the schedule of professional development sessions
Madam
outlined
Chair, I
under
believe it's a point of
strategies.
order.
Point of order.
Trustee Bell?
Thank you. Apologies, Chair, for the interruption, but unfortunately,
we can't hear you.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
We can't hear you.
No?
How about we take a 5-minute recess and get the sound issue sorted out, and then we can move on.
Thank you.
So Trustee Bell, what was it that you wish to speak about?
A point of order. Unfortunately, my vote for the Indigenous person representation on SEAC was miscaptured, and I actually would like it to state that I voted in favor of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad we were able to hear you say that, and we will make sure that the record is corrected. And thank you very much. And so back to the board work plan. I was about to draw your attention to a couple of changes to the schedule of professional development sessions that are outlined in the original version of the work plan under strategies and opportunities. It was not possible to schedule our session, professional development session on equity in data for this month, but it will be held in late February on a date after our rescheduled trustee and senior staff retreat. And trustees will receive more information on the proposed schedule very soon. Also, having moved the retreat from where it was in April originally to February, we are also rescheduling the proposed event with our community partners to a time in April or early May. And those are changes, but I did want to flag them just so you weren't relying on the original version and wondering where some of those things had disappeared. Next item is item 14, matters for information. And I believe we have no new matters for information this evening. So that brings us to new business. Is there any new business? And I am seeing none. So having completed our agenda, I declare this meeting adjourned. And I'm not sure whether Chair Lara would like a couple of minutes before we move into the budget committee of the whole budget. We just have to trade places here. Thank you all very much.
I've been told we've got everybody. So good evening. Welcome to the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board meeting for the Committee of the Whole Budget on the 30th of January, 2024. I'd like to call our meeting to order, acknowledging that we are meeting tonight on the unceded, unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Algonquin Nation, and we'd like to thank the Algonquin Nation for hosting us on their land. In accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, does any board member have an interest to declare? Seeing none, we're going to move along. Do we have a mover for the agenda? I see Trustee Milburns. All right. Are there any changes or amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda as presented? And that passes. Are there any delegations this evening? Seeing none, I'm now going to call upon Director Buffoni to introduce report 24-005.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it over to our Associate Director Gerwa regarding the revised estimates for the current school year.
Through you, Chair. I did a presentation up for all three discussion items. I'm just going to wait till they bring it up.
While we get that on the screen, do you want to join us at the table? So we're not craning our necks to see you.
Through you, Chair. So we're here to present the report on revised estimates as well as the oral report on the budget process as well as some of the needs-based analysis. So I have the General Manager of Finance here to help me present this report. Next slide. So some of the key changes to the revised estimates was obviously the change of enrollment. The original enrollment data had us at a number, and that number went up. So that was a positive for the revised estimates. We also had a change in the elementary and secondary teacher staffing. We had to make some revisions to the staff replacement costs based on some of the trends we were seeing. There was also some changes in pupil funding and some school operation and maintenance costs. And the net result was that there was a $500,000 deficit that we're still working through within the administration. Next slide. So you can see from the original estimates and then our revised estimates, we had a decrease in elementary enrollment and an increase in secondary enrollment overall, net increase, but much better than where what we had originally anticipated. Next slide. So these are some of the financial changes. You can see there was a reduction in staffing costs. There was a change in the contingency that we had set aside. We had the required savings that I just talked about, the $500,000 deficit. We've had some other miscellaneous changes, school operations, occasional teacher costs. We had to add a little bit of funding to that based on the trend that we were seeing with the expenses. We got some additional PPF funding and some additional transportation funding, and then a change in our amortization. So the objectives for 23-24 is ensuring compliance for our 24-25 estimates coming up. Obviously, our 23-24 mid-year ministry reporting, our 23-24 year end, and then our 24-25 revised estimates. We're going to review our internal processes as you'll see, want to update our ERP system. So that review of internal processes will involve working through position control, which we've been doing for quite some time. We just did a trial of it. Didn't quite work exactly how we had hoped, but we continue to work in that area, as well as continuing to clean up, aligning our expenses and our GL structure. And of course, once we get ready, we will be undertaking an ERP implementation of some sort to update our financial management and human resource management tools. Next slide. So why is compliance so important? Basically, the ministry releases their technical papers each year, detailing their programs and fundings and reporting requirements. And it's important that we comply because it impacts our funding. And so that's a key requirement to ensure that we don't lose any of the funding that we receive from the ministry. Next slide. So just this slide here is staffing at OCDSB. And I know we often talk about how 80% of our expenses are related to staff, but I just wanted to show you where the majority of that 80% is actually directed, and only a small portion of it is administration and governance, because I know oftentimes at the table when we talk about trying to find efficiencies in administration and governance, there's literally not that much there, right? And so I just wanted to, kind of give you a visual of what that looks like. Next slide. So I'm going to stop here and give you an opportunity to ask me any questions about the revised estimates themselves.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open a speakers list. Okay. I have Trustee Aziz and then Trustee Milburn. Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to think if I want to save my questions until after the oral needs analysis is presented. So if you could kindly turn to Trustee Milburn, and I will remain a little bit longer. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Milburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So looking at the school operation and maintenance revised estimates section from the report, we have found, it says that we have found that contract specifically snow removal needed to be increased, and we added more funds. As part of this, and I apologize if I am misunderstanding, but as part of this revised estimates, are we also looking at revisiting our snow removal contracts if needed to help with this overspending?
So through you, Chair, we're constantly reviewing our snow removal contracts, but the reality is that we have great difficulty in finding reliable snow removal contractors to provide us these services. And I've received several complaints from some of the contractors that we do have, and how they remove the snow, where they remove the snow, whether they open the proper pathways, whether we do it on time. So, I mean, it's a continuous process for reviewing those contracts for performance and cost. There's not a lot of savings out there right now because there is greater demand than there is supply. And that's just the reality of the landscape in that area right now, which is why we see the increasing rates and the financial pressures, because they can charge it because there's just not enough to go around.
I think that's all my questions for now. I'll save the rest to the end. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other speakers, I have a quick question, and that is, where do you plan to find $500,000?
Through you, Chair. So we've already started that process of discussion around the senior table. It's going to come out of the administrative side within the headquarters. The director himself has offered up a significant portion of his current budget in some staff savings and some supplies and services savings, and we'll all do that, and we will find it from within those resources.
Any further comment, Director? No? Okay. Seeing no further questions, if you want to start the second bullet point, we can go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to start the second process. This is really about the process, and I just wanted to kind of lay out where the financial landscape is for us right now. The ministry kind of confirmed at the CFO code conference that they're not going to release the technical papers until later in the year, and it won't be as early as it was last year, and most likely be a little bit later. And they were very non-committal about any future funding. So that was kind of the flavor that we got from the ministry. The province is currently undergoing its annual budget process, so it makes sense that they would be non-committal until they could figure out whether they're going to receive any additional fundings within the Ministry of Education that they could redirect to the boards. If the past is any indicator, any new funding will come through the PPFs, and it will be directed towards their priorities. Generally, we haven't seen a lot of relief in the funding formula itself. And at the moment, there is definitely no indication of additional funding. That's kind of the discussion around the table. From an OCDSB, we've experienced a change in our enrollment, and I think that we need to consider that when we talk about needs-based budget or where we will be next year. I don't think we can expect the same growth that maybe we've had in the last couple of years, and we just want to be a little more conservative in our estimates so we don't find ourselves in a situation where we have to scale back at the last minute like we did this year. It causes a lot of churn in the system, and it's not healthy for the schools. OCDSB has no accumulated reserves that can be relied on for operations. So that puts us in a situation where we have to be very cautious in the level of risk that we take when we develop our budget. We do continue to remain under ministry supervision because we do not have an accumulated reserve of at least 1%. We should be at least 2%, but we don't even have at least 1%. So we're still under ministry supervision. Inflation and rising corporate costs continue to add pressure to deliver the current programs. The reality is it's hard to estimate what those will be, but you see it in the snow removal, you see it in utilities, you see it in many areas that are beyond our control. And just to deliver the same level of services, the cost to provide those services continue to increase. We did a survey among all the boards in the district. Only 47 boards responded to the survey, but 70% of the boards are currently running a deficit. So that's the landscape within the education sector in Ontario, right? So next slide. So where we are now within OCDSB, we're working hard to identify all those pressures that are beyond our control, in particular OT replacement, utility, snow removal, things like that. So we're trying to get a grip on those things based on what we're seeing from our vendors as we enter into new contracts. We're also looking to identify areas of efficiency. Obviously, we always do that, but it's important to keep doing that. And so if we can find ways to do things cheaper, we obviously will investigate that. And we always look for either public or community support in helping us find those areas. Good ideas help no matter where they come from. We're having senior leadership team identify the growth or needs priorities across the district. We continue to monitor trends and expenses. We continue to map expenses to budget. As I mentioned a couple of times in previous budget committee meetings, we weren't really good at aligning our budgets to our expenses, and we made a lot of progress in that area. And I think we're more than 80% there, but it's not completely done. And to do strong forecasting, you want to make sure that you align your budgets and expenses, right? So that way you can properly budget your pressures and you can properly identify your pressures. Position control is key to that, and because that's 80% of our expenses. And again, we've made a lot of progress in that area, but we still have a ways to go. And we continue to await ministry guidance. That'll be key because we won't know how big the bucket is until we get those technical papers. And of course, our enrollment estimates will also drive a lot of that. So I'll stop there. That's kind of where we are from a financial process standpoint. I just wanted to give the board a chance to ask any questions or identify the concerns they might have.
Okay, I'm going to open a speakers list. I have Trustee Nash.
Yes, and through you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. You have on there as a cost that's beyond our control is occasional teachers, but that's related to absences. Isn't that the case?
It is, and you'll see when we talk about the needs-based budget, I picked two things to talk to you today that you identified, and OT replacement cost is one of them.
Okay, very good. So I'll wait for your presentation. Thank you.
Trustee Scott.
Thank you. I was interested in the results of your survey where you had the 47 boards, 70% of which indicated they were running a deficit. Are the deficits all of similar proportion to the board's budgets, or are there any particular areas where all of those boards are seeing challenges in terms of budgets and expenses not quite lining up?
Through you, Chair, they didn't identify which boards are running the deficit. I think they on purpose did it more, collected all the data and then put it into some spreadsheets. I'll add another statistic to that. The previous year, only 22 of 47 boards were running a deficit. So you can see the growth. And it makes sense because they removed the COVID funding. They were a little tricky with the way the funding formula rolled out for transportation, with that last minute rollout with some reductions and so it's not surprising to me that boards had increased number of boards were running deficits. There are also some boards that managed to run surpluses through COVID and could be tapping into that for a variety of reasons. One, to spend it down. Two, for initiatives like new ERP systems, things like that. So it's hard to say exactly why, but the consistent messaging amongst the CFOs is that OT replacement costs, transportation, we all have the same pressures. Spec ed, these are all underfunded from the ministry funding formula, and we're all struggling to balance the needs and the resources that are available to us.
Certainly, Madam Chair, from conversations with trustees from other boards during the OPSPA Education Symposium, it was clear that there are many other boards which are still finding themselves quite challenged by the fact that they had to dip into their reserves to cover a bunch of COVID costs. And that is a continued sore spot in terms of trying to work with the ministry to address some of our budget issues. But the other thing that was very consistent was that just about everybody I talked to was commenting on the cost of replacement staff. And that's something that I was pleased to see, not only our submission, but there were several submissions from other boards as well that raised exactly that topic. So I hope we're being heard.
Through you, Chair, when we talk a little bit about that in particular tonight, the ministry has acknowledged that it as a problem and has committed to setting up a working group to look at the issue. So any more questions? Is that it?
Seeing no further questions.
Okay, so the needs-based support, the following information was provided to the trustees at the breakdown of the ministry's special education funding along with the associated expenses earlier on. The newest ministry funding allocations for 23-24 for transportation and associated costs, the breakdown of funding for occasional teachers and the associated costs, and we continue to work we continue to work with facilities, special education, mental health, and cybersecurity. But tonight, I'd like to talk about two of the issues that you raised. Next slide. Before I do that, there's one more slide. The finance budget team. So where does the finance team fit into helping with the needs-based analysis? They're willing to provide just last year and current year data related to the 5 initiatives, guidance on how to navigate the education EFIS system that we use, and anything that we've remitted to the ministry. So if you have any questions related to any of those areas, please send them on. And then guidance on the technical papers as they come out. Next slide. So OT replacement costs. Here's the breakdown of where we are with OT replacement costs. You can see that the funding from elementary is $11.9 million, and then secondary funding is $3.6 million for a total of $15.6 million. Right now, we're estimating $32.7-ish million for a projected deficit from the funding formula of $17.1 million. Significant amount of pressure that we're utilizing the regular GSN to cover. And that, like I had mentioned earlier, that number was adjusted upwards a little bit from our initial estimate based on the trends that we're seeing. Next slide. So considerations and actions. So obviously this pressure is linked to essentially negotiated contracts within the province. So we don't have a lot of control over why we're here. Although the OCDSB is below the provincial average, it continues to be a growing pressure for us and the entire province. There has been, we allocated, I don't know if you remember, but in the initial budget, we allocated $500,000 in BMS training to help reduce workplace injuries. And that's part of the way forward of trying to reduce these costs. And so that was one initiative that we tried to do. We've also hired a general manager of wellness and occupational health and safety to focus on prevention. So prevention is the key. The more that we can reduce injuries in the workplace and the more we can work with mental health and wellness, the less likely they'll be absent from the workplace, so we won't incur these costs. So that's another thing that we're doing. The province has indicated they plan to start the working group that I was telling you about, and they do say that they are going to try to provide us with some tips and ideas for helping alleviate some of these pressures. We, as CFOs, talk amongst each other as well to see what the other boards are doing too. So like as we're all facing it, we're all looking at ways to find ways to improve in that area. The board continues to monitor forecasts to ensure financial compliance, but at the end of the day, we have to budget what we think it's going to cost, right? We don't have the luxury of running a deficit. We have to make sure that we're realistic, which is part of the reason why we are so financially restricted. And so I request that the trustees continue to advocate on this issue and any opportunity you have, because it is the single largest issue that in the funding formula that is putting us in the position that we're in today. So I'd like to open the floor to the trustees, because part of this exercise is to have the discussion about a needs analysis. And so I kind of have to volley it back now to the trustees to have the discussion that you guys wanted to have, because you raised it as an issue that you wanted to discuss as part of the budget process.
Okay. I'm going to open the floor to questions from my colleagues. Although I am going to preface this by saying that we didn't get your presentation in advance. So people are going to need some time to digest what you've just thrown at us very quickly. So I see questions from Trustee Milburn.
Can we have if I can request, can we have the slide with the OT replacement cost back up on the screen? Please. So echoing Trustee Lyra's comments, it is hard to react right in the moment to the slide that we're seeing, but I am seeing that this is our biggest deficit. So one of the questions that I have is, are we looking at new ways to work with, I'll say, our union partners to figure out the exact reasons why we're seeing such a large deficit in our OT replacement costs? And the reason I am asking is because, do they have any insights on different ways that we could be looking at our budget, or different ways we could be allocating our time so that we can reduce that OT replacement cost?
Through you, Chair. I mean, there is a lot of discussion between staff and unions working on different programs, trying to identify different needs to help support our employees, right? We're looking at the tools that we had in place that were working. We hired a general manager to take on a greater role in just doing that exactly thing. We've kind of, well, and I should kind of turn it over to HR a little bit to, I don't want to put you on the spot, Pam, but if you are comfortable talking about why we hired a general manager of wellness and what steps PCL is taking to invest in trying to prevent and work toward prevention is the key, right?
Yes, thank you. And through you, Chair. We have made some changes since the fall, and we basically split what used to be part of my portfolio and brought on a new general manager of employee wellness and occupational health and safety, so that there is more of a focus on prevention in terms of reducing sick leave costs, reducing WSIB costs, which also have that replacement staffing cost attached to it. In terms of we have seen a reduction in overall absenteeism. If we look at replacement costs from last fall in 2022 in comparison to the fall of 2023, our fill rate has actually improved quite a bit in terms of last year, closer to the pandemic, we had more occasions where we had to close classes, and we weren't able to bring anyone in to replace an absent teacher, ECE, EA, for example. We have fewer of those situations this year, but the costs associated with those replacement staff has not gone down, because we did save money in 2022 because we weren't paying for anyone behind that replacement. So we have made some strides in terms of, the overall goals in reducing the absenteeism, but the costs associated with that don't necessarily flow through in the same way.
All right, thank you for that. So if we're looking at a needs-based analysis or something that we could debate as trustees, something that I would love to see is, for an example, for our EA replacement cost, if they are saying that it would be easier for them to have like an extra EA, for example, in each of their rooms or something like that, and paying for more EAs in each room. This is not the greatest example, but this is an on-the-fly example. That is something that I would expect to see in this kind of replacement cost, is something, or a needs-based analysis for this replacement cost. So something that's weighing different options so that we can start reducing it and looking at how we can reallocate money based on the other things. So that's just an example. I'm not the finance experts of what that actually would entail, but that is an example of what I would want to see in this kind of analysis. That's also all my comments.
Okay.
Through you, Chair, I'll just make a comment to that. That's exactly what PCL is doing. We are working with OSB, our insurer, at the types of trainings that we can provide to reduce workplace injury, slips, trips, and falls, different things that we can do as far as markings on outdoor spaces so that people are aware they're in a high risk area for getting a ball strike. Like, we are absolutely investigating all the different areas on why we have teachers go out on sick leave, injury, and looking for different ways to bring this number down. We are below the provincial average. We are trending lower in certain parts of the short-term absences. So some of the things we're doing appears to be working, but I don't think you're going to see a drastic change no matter what we do, because we're talking in the margins here of the policy changes and the things that we can do to make this number go down. The reality is that it's a benefit that employees take and have, and the environment is such that we encourage people to take that mental health break, or people who are sick are more prone to take that day off when maybe years gone by they wouldn't be, right? They don't have that financial incentive to cash those sick days out like they did under the previous contract. So we're never going to see a $10 million drop. The reality is that we need the ministry to step up and fund this.
Okay. I have Lynn and then me. So Trustee Scott.
Point of privilege, Chair. I just wanted to note that my hand has been up and had asked to be a part of the discussion after the needs-based presentation. Thank you.
Okay, noted.
So I appreciate that Trustee Milburn asked to have this slide back, because this was one I wanted to look at more closely. When we consider the number of teaching staff that we have in the elementary grades relative to the number of teaching staff that we have in the secondary grades, certainly usually it comes out to be not quite a 2/3, 1/3 kind of split between those two. And what I'm trying to figure out, because I'm not sure of the exact proportion, but is the rate of replacement, need for replacements, similar in the two, or is one of them higher than the other in the two panels?
Through you, Chair, I know one is higher than the other. I don't know if it's marginally different. I'm wondering if the PCL has a comment to make specifically on the number.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Are we seeing a proportionately higher rate of absence for teachers in the elementary panel than we do in the secondary panel? And is it a big difference, or is it a little difference?
Yes, it is proportionately higher in elementary versus secondary.
Because I guess I'm wondering, are we actually trying to employ different strategies to mitigate the situation in between the two panels, given that the nature of teaching in a secondary school is not exactly the same as the nature of teaching in an elementary school? I think the hazards that are experienced are somewhat different. And certainly, my sense is that it's the younger ones who are catching everything and giving it to everybody.
If I may, yes, definitely at elementary, we are seeing both higher WSIB costs and injuries related to the age of those students. But we're also seeing, and again, we don't have access to a diagnosis or the reason for the employee's illness, but just based on some abstract data and additional information that employees enter into our system, we can see that there are a lot of mental health and burnout related absences, more so at the elementary panel.
So I guess when we're looking at the interventions that we can implement that might mitigate some of that, are we using different strategies then depending on the panel and even within a panel depending on the grade span?
Yes, one of the examples that the associate director made earlier in the presentation was through BMS training. So for example, we received that additional $500,000 allocation for that training budget last year. Those funds are, for the most part, being directed towards elementary school staff versus the secondary staff in terms of the type of environment that they're in. And, you know, probably our general manager of employee wellness and safety could probably offer some additional examples as well.
Our director would also like to comment on this.
I would
think that-
appreciate hearing that, and then I have a follow-up question if I may.
Would you like to continue or?
No, you go.
Okay, great. Through you, I think the trustee raises a good question. I would say in addition to the comments made by our manager, I would add that it's also a differentiation, a continued look at differentiating the strategies even by employee group, because different employee groups have different interactions with our students, our staff, our school communities. So I think it's not solely a teacher discussion, elementary, secondary, even by grade, but it's also perhaps tied to the nature of the work that's being done in both our panels. And I'll conclude with just a comment of thanks to all of our staff for the positive trends we see. We know this is an issue, but we're off to start this school year that is heading in the right direction that way. And I just want to express my appreciation to all our staff. It's a challenging role that every single one of our employees play, and we appreciate all that they do to help work on some of those strategies themselves and the support they lean on centrally for some of those pieces. So I think it's a valid comment, not only in the discussion amongst teachers, but across all of our employee groups.
So coming back to that, this is good for us to hear. But I think the other thing is that it's not just the staff, it's the students. And so from that point of view, are there interventions that we are using with our students which might help to mitigate the situation in terms of the stress that teachers and other school staff are experiencing, and in terms of mitigating the behavior of some of our students, which can lead to injuries?
Director wants to start on this one.
I'll begin and then I will turn it over to staff for perspectives. I think, again, it's an excellent point raised by the trustee. There are a number of strategies that our students are using and our staff are using within our sites. A great example, and it's not the only one, but there are very specifically designated areas in schools, rooms that students can use proactively should they need a bit of a break, a reprieve. It might be for some exercise of a physical nature or a mental nature in terms of retooling to be able to head back into whatever learning environment they are in. So that is definitely a commonplace strategy within our sites that is being capitalized. I see it every week in my school visits, very cleverly used, very respectfully utilized. So I think the trustee is spot on. Chair Scott raises a good point. Our students are becoming more aware, more self-aware. School Mental Health Ontario, just as an example, provides a tremendous number of resources for staff to use, but also to support students, work in the third path. There are a number of strategies that we're continuing to utilize along with our students to continue to ensure positive mental health and just rebalancing, refocusing in the day-to-day of the teaching and learning environments we conduct.
I believe I saw a hand from Associate Director Reynolds. Did you want to speak?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Chair, in addition to some of the comments that the directors made around body breaks that are being built into student IEPs and other interventions, and some of the rooms that are available to help support that, the director mentioned the third path. Over the past few years, we also had a lot of work in zones of regulation, which I know we're doing more third path work now, but those also are tools that are in our schools that have helped students regulate and identify. In addition, Safe Schools and our mental health leads are helping schools, each school, create a student well-being plan based on their student climate data and other data to help identify the appropriate interventions and resources for students that might result in a better regulation, self-regulation. So there are a number of interventions that are happening, a lot being led by LSS, but not all. The social emotional learning teachers are having some profound impacts where they're working with students and staff. So there's a lot going on to try to help with this. And you know, as you've noticed, illness is certainly a factor driving this, but it's not the only one. There are other leaves that are represented here, to the best of my understanding, but you know, definitely working on some of those medical leave issues.
Thank you.
Okay. I have me next on the list. So I have a question that is, how much of this is funding related and how much of this is not being able to get the appropriate person for the appropriate position related? Because I know that if we can't find like an emergent, a temporary ECE, we'll go one step up and we'll try and bring in an EA. And if we can't find that person, we'll go one step up and we'll bring in a PSP. And I'm wondering how much of it is directly related to funding and how much of it is related to not having the appropriate person to fill the appropriate position.
Through you, Chair. We do have a protocol. It's about a 13-step protocol for schools to follow when they are unable to fill an absence before they're able to what we refer to as manually fill a position. So we do have rosters for casual staff and occasional teachers. So for example, if an ECE was absent, we would first, there would be our call-out system that we use, Easy Connect, would contact all of the casual ECEs on our roster by text and notify them of the opportunity, and they can accept or decline that opportunity. We do see a lot of situations where we exhaust that list without the ability to fill in behind that absence. We then go to either other positions in the school who might be able to extend their hours. Typically, we don't move up a level in terms of increasing pay. Typically, it actually goes to someone who's at a lower level of pay, such as our breakfast and lunchtime monitors, and where they're in the school already and they may be asked to extend their day for supervision responsibilities, even though they don't necessarily have ECE qualifications. That's typically what we see when we're unable to fill, is that it either goes to someone in the school who doesn't have the qualifications, but is already there and vetted by the OCDSB, or we also have, as a last resort, an emergency roster of staff that we also use.
Okay. So I guess the question that I was asking is, at a future conversation on this topic, can we try and figure out how much of this is related to just being funding deferential and how much of this is related to not having the appropriate person for the job? And I know it's not a question you can answer on the fly.
Through you, Chair. The amount of work it would take to identify every position for every absence and figure out whether it was filled with the type, like the analysis that would take would be more than my team could undertake in this budget process. The reality is we're probably filling those positions to a savings effect because we're not finding the teachers. It's not costing us more money. It's probably saving us money. That number would be probably higher because there's certain restrictions like the number of days a retired teacher can work. If those teachers could work more days, we'd be paying more money for more qualified people, right? So like it would be the level of detail and what purpose would getting that data do? What would be the intention for the budget process to, like, we couldn't use it to address change in the budget. Like we couldn't put a line item in there. So I guess I'm asking what, like, if that's something that the board would be interested in, I don't think it should be part of the 23-20 or the budget process. I think that's something you should request a report on that we could probably discuss and use for future. And and the other thing I would add is the superintendent of PCL is online as well. And I think she might want to add a little bit to the last question.
If Superintendent Hall would like to speak.
Sure, through you, Chair. So I appreciate the question, Trustee Lyra, but I think there's a couple pieces being conflated there. I think at the core of the challenge we have with replacement, with the cost of replacement staff, really comes down to the availability and usage of the number of sick leave days that staff can utilize and do utilize. So I don't think the cost pressure is coming from the person replacing the absent staff. While I appreciate different roles, the replacement costs are different. So, you know, it may be more expensive to replace a teacher than another employee, depending on the nature of the work and the compensation for those folks. But I don't think we're able to draw a connection there that might be useful in terms of, you know, the breakdown you're looking for, because those costs, you know, relate to the sick leave piece. I don't think it's as substantial when you actually try to connect who the backfill is. And I would say in general, we are very successful with replacing, for example, an absent teacher with an absent occasional teacher. I think by and large, we are able to do that. And you know, in terms of the funding from the province to cover the sick leave absence, I think that's something that finance can probably provide you with. But I'm not sure if the other piece, that drill down would really be helpful in terms of an overall strategy or way forward with addressing this funding issue.
I guess the way I would see this as related to the budget is if it was primarily or even 15% caused by staff differential wages, we could look at investing in outreach programs to attract new staff to make sure that we're right fitting the position to the person. If it, as you have stated, is predominantly a funding gap and a sick leave gap and not related to the appropriate person, then it's good to know, but it would be less directly to the budget. I would be curious to know if there were significant savings being found because we're, instead of having someone right fitted to the job, we're keeping lunch monitors in late to supervise classrooms. That would be a saving, as you've put it, but might be another concern or of other concern.
Through you, Chair, it's definitely not going to be a savings because we're paying an extra wage that we wouldn't have paid otherwise. And the process would be that we would try to find the qualified teacher to fill it first. But if we were to employ a strategy to try to find savings, that could be a strategy. I don't think that's something the board would be interested in, nor the director or anybody around this table, but that we're not doing those sort of things to try to save to reduce costs or keep this down.
I understand we're not doing it to save money, but I'd like to know how much money we are saving by having this process. Because it would give us an approximation of how many times we've brought people in for those positions when instead of having a teacher, they had a lunchtime monitor. Because I don't know if we have that kind of data right now. And I think we should. I'm going to pause my own time and go on to, I have Trustee Aziz, then Trustee Blackburn. Are there any other hands I should put on my list? Okay. Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I will preface my comments by saying if I go over time with my questions, please kindly put me on the second time speaker list because I have a number of questions and I will appreciate Manager Terry and Associate Director Giroir. Some of my questions might not be answered today, and I completely understand and appreciate that. And I would appreciate a follow-up at our next COW budget meeting, especially given that this is, I think, only the second time we're meeting to discuss the budget in this cycle. So On that note, I will also say that my questions today are more about what we hope to see in the next budget meeting, just because we didn't get to see the OT replacement cost deck far enough in advance to prepare more substantive questions. And so some of my questions today are a bit more broad and maybe a bit more related to topics that I'm hoping we'll discuss at our next Cal budget. So on that note, my first questions are regarding the transportation line items as brought forth in the revised estimates in the previous presentation. Do we know how many bus routes, and this might be a question Associate Director Giroir might not be able to answer, but if someone else in the room knows how many bus routes were affected this year by the new funding formula where we had bus routes missing, like how many bus routes were missing on that first week of school?
Through you, Chair. So the intention after we did the OT discussion was to go into the transportation slides. So I do have slides on transportation as well as some comments. So I could answer that now, or we could defer till we get to the transportation discussion.
We'll hold that for the transportation discussion. Anything else, Trustee Aziz?
Yes. Maybe I'll ask this in anticipation. Are the next slides regarding childcare or special education?
Through you, Chair. The next slides are just transportation. Earlier, when I was talking about the needs analysis, the intention is to bring some of those to the next meeting. I got to work with the superintendent of LSS to see, like, he's been involved in union negotiations, so we didn't get a chance to collaborate to develop slides to be ready for tonight's meeting, but I'm hoping to be able, and I have talked to him, and I did signal to him that the intention is to present something at the next committee of the whole budget. And I also spoke to the executive officer of IT, and he's going to bring the cybersecurity. So probably the next one would, the intention would be to present those. But again, just making sure that the team has the time to do the review that they need to do to come here to have a meaningful discussion.
Sure, I appreciate that. So I will save those questions for next time, or I'll save the transportations for after the deck. If I could ask a few general questions about the budget, because you've answered one, which was what would be in the next Cal budget meeting. One concern I have is regarding the $500,000 deficit. Are we able to, with that deficit, are we able to rebuild our reserves in this budget cycle? And if not, what are the consequences?
Through you, Chair, the $500,000 deficit is additional cuts that we have to make internally to make sure we balance the budget. So it's not a savings of any sort. We have not produced, we'd have to produce a surplus budget to start to add to the accumulated reserves. I would recommend that we consider producing a surplus budget next year, because we do have a responsibility to bring this board back into the proper financial health that it should be in. By not having an accumulated reserve, we miss out on opportunities to invest in areas that we would like to invest in one time, because we don't have the funding to support that. Most of the boards that I talk to have healthy accumulated surpluses and do have the opportunity to invest in things that we do not have the opportunity to invest in because we are so close to the line with our finances.
Okay, thank you. That answers that question very clearly. Can I ask if there are, given the upcoming board retreat and program review, are there budget impacts to this budget cycle given the program review, or will that come forward in our next budget cycle?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the question, Trustee Aziz. It's not likely that the kind of work we'll do in the program review process will impact the current budget or next year's budget. It would likely have a significant impact on the following year's budget, just based on a preliminary timeline and the kind of decision-making processes that would have to happen to prepare the system for any potential changes with respect to programs.
Thank you, Director. Lastly, and this is potentially a question for, if not the next Cal budget meeting, but the one after. I'm wondering what areas are at risk for being shortchanged for insufficient funding that could jeopardize their functioning or ability to provide their program and or service to our students.
Through you, Chair. That's why we do the internal process and sit around the table as senior leadership to make sure that we address any concerns that would not allow us to meet the requirements and needs of our students. If we had an area that we were concerned about, we would signal that to the board. I'm sure the director would be having that conversation. But I'm pretty sure that with the resources that we have, we'll be able to make sure that we meet our responsibilities and obligations. Would we do as much as we would like to do? We'd never be able to do as much as we would like to do with the resources we have, but we will certainly make sure that we meet the needs of our students to the best of our ability with the resources we have.
Okay,
Trustee,
I will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Trustee Lyra.
I'm going to put you on the second time speakers list.
You don't need to do that. I will wait for the transportation piece of the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. That takes us to Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've listened with interest to my colleagues' questions and comments. I would just, from my perspective, I agree with what the Associate Director and CFO has said about building up our reserves. I believe that is something that we should be seriously thinking about. It's something that I've, for most of my time on the board, had a proud track record of supporting. And like the Associate Director and CFO indicated, when we don't have that, it does rob us of opportunities to make investments. And typically, like education is an investment, which saves us money in the long run. Investing in certain things within the education system saves us money in the long run. And we don't have that capacity. The other thing I would say is that it doesn't matter when we start this process, in my opinion, based on my experience. It doesn't matter how many questions we ask. It doesn't matter how we ask staff to dissect the numbers and go through a lot of things. And to what end, I'm not sure most of the time, but that doesn't, at the end of the day, give us any more money from the ministry. And so at the end of the day, my friends and colleagues, we will have hard choices to make. And as leaders in the community, that's our job. That's, if, you know, I put my name on the ballot knowing that there would come times when I upset people based on the decisions I make. And looking at the OT replacement cost, I know that many people who know me well know I spend a significant amount of time in my schools. Lots of time on Friday nights. I'll be in 3 different schools this particular Friday night and 1 the next Friday night. And I don't just walk in, take a picture and walk out. So I interact with not only staff, and I mean all staff, not just the teacher, not just the principal. I interact with the custodians. I interact with librarians, everybody. And then I interact with parents because they're there too, because they're not drop-off events. You have to stay with your kid. And one thing they tell me is they need more supports in the classroom, things like educational assistance. But educational assistance cost money. And so if you add a cost, you have to reduce an expenditure. And it's that second part, reducing the expenditure to add a cost to help support our staff, that would hopefully reduce that expenditure. But again, it takes leadership and it takes courage. And it means that a decision would be made that might upset somebody. So I would like a staff comment on whether or not the union partners have talked about more I understand like reducing physical injuries and all that stuff. I work in steel toes. I get those videos all the time, slip, trips and falls, don't do it. All the things I can do to avoid doing that. That's all important. But there's also the stress component. And that has to deal with people and support. So what are the union partners telling us about what supports they need around that? And how do we address them?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think Trustee Blackburn raises some valid points. We are in regular communication with our Federation and union partners who are an important partner in this discussion. They raise, like many other stakeholders, parents, students themselves, our staff, concerns. I'll just mention a few as an example. It's a complicated query because it's not an easy process to dissect, but dysregulation happening among students. Our Associate Director Reynolds spoke to that to a certain extent, has been a significant factor post-pandemic. It was probably on the rise. I think it was on the rise pre-pandemic, but is a factor that our staff are working diligently at. Some of the work around physical injuries, as you said, slips, trips, falls, those other pieces beyond those with staff, the increasing complexities of our students, the diversity of their learning needs, make the work in teaching and learning environments challenging. Our Federation union partners represent their members well. They bring forward those issues to us. They're open and willing to work on strategies and solutions, suggestions to get to some of the concerns that members are bringing to them and our employees are bringing to us. It's an ongoing conversation. It is happening. The trustee raises some valid points. Dysregulation is but one example of some of the challenges we're facing. And I think we're resetting coming out of the pandemic, renormalizing the continuity of learning that may have been disrupted more than we would have liked over a lengthy pandemic period. I also think our parents and guardians are raising the same kinds of concerns with our educators and other staff members. It's a work in progress, but there's no question sports in the classroom, including educational assistance, is a valid point raised, and where the demand is probably outpacing the supply if we were talking about ideal conditions. So it's a valid point raised by the trustee.
Do any of our Federation or union partners want to comment? Andrew?
Yeah, no, just a quick comment. Our biggest concern that we've been raising, I've been here 30 years, and when I first started on the board, our square foot for cleaning at night was approximately about 12 to 15,000. Currently, we're almost 25,000 square feet. So, yeah, the workloading has always been a big concern. We're getting a lot of issues with repetitive strain injuries and, just the burnout, right? And just to add on to that, Pino, through the whole pandemic, it was pretty rough on our staff. It really was. So, but we're working closely. We're trying. We're in the middle of negotiating right now. So we have bigger problems to deal with, and one of them is trying to attract workers to come here and to stay here. And currently, that's not happening. So, so those are our big challenges at this point. But since I came back, we've been working pretty tight and trying to fix those problems. So that's all. Thanks.
Right hand button, Susan.
Susan Rabb, secondary occasional teachers. I appreciate the comments by Trustee Blackburn and the other comments that have been made in terms of focus on accidents and injuries and illnesses. I very much appreciate the way that the conversation has moved from the physical pieces to the mental and emotional and stress level pieces. I think we also need to be thinking not just the student workload pieces, but the things that the school board actually has more direct control over. It has been a shock to look and recognize how much recovering we still have to do from the pandemic. And the focus that's required on being kind and being supportive of the other human beings that we're interacting with. And I know that those are more difficult for the financial folks to quantify but those are the ones, our members who are dealing with special needs kids who are in the wrong place or who are having the wrong conditions, not getting the support they need. That's something that our members are able to process more easily than demands in terms of administration and workload that are put upon them by the adults that are their colleagues. So I think stress is a massive piece right now, and it manifests itself sometimes in accidents and in illnesses. But the things like report cards, things like how to report my own absence. Those are the kinds of things that maybe we can be looking at as well in the bigger and the longer term.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Director, you wanted to.
Just want to thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I know Superintendent Hall's on the line. I just want to give the opportunity for our superintendent and PCL and our general manager, limited any additional comments around on this important topic.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair, I think some of the issues that were raised are very much what we're hearing from staff. Certainly workload has been a consistent concern, but I think more nuanced than that is the comment Susan has made about, the post-pandemic effect, if you will, or, the increasing or the increased stress level of folks through the district. And, while we recognize that has had an impact and we know it's tangible, those pieces are complex. And I think, to be fair, while there are some common threads through the feedback we're receiving from our Federation partners, there's also nuance to the different groups of staff. And they do come, as the director have said, a lot is discussed in terms of managing student behavior and supporting student behavior as a common thread. But within that, it would be different feedback from our occasional teachers versus our, regular classroom teachers versus educational assistants versus ECEs. So what we do regularly through our conversations, so we are very lucky in our district to have really great relationships with our Federation partners. And we have a open communication where if there are issues or concerns, what we do on the day-to-day is try to quickly address those. And they fall in different areas depending on where the pressure is at that time or what the issue is. So I think we have a pretty strong relationship and an open relationship in addressing those issues. And what I can also share with the board is, we've mentioned some pieces around injury prevention. And I think another, a common concern is coming up around wellness in terms of psychological safety of staff and those pieces. And as the director has alluded, we have made some significant changes, including adding, some streamlining between our occupational health and safety arm of the organization and our wellness, disability managers, and WSIB coordinators to take a more holistic approach and not just the physical health component, but employee wellness in its entirety to try to see what we can do to put supports in place on the preventative side rather than having to be reactive. While we recognize, we can't be perfect in those pieces, We do know that a coordinated and supported approach is going to help us to understand the needs of our staff, to be able to use the data to make some evidence-based decisions and to be more responsive. So I will say, as it was mentioned, our training for BMS is one of the strategies we have utilized, and the board has graciously approved the funding for in last year's budget into this year, to really give staff the tools they need to support students who are under duress or who are struggling with regulation. And so those are the preventative pieces we want to continue to do. But we're getting some great feedback in this meeting about what other pieces we can bring forward. And I think as a district, there are things within our control and programs and supports that we can put in place, acknowledging that there are bigger pieces around absences that are very complex and maybe not addressable in this conversation. But we will take this feedback back as we move our analysis forward into upcoming budget conversations.
Thank you, Superintendent Hall. Seeing no other first-time speakers, and no other second-time speakers, because Trustee Aziz wants to speak on transportation, I'm going to have us move on to the next block of the oral update, but I will note the time and that I'm reducing everyone's speaking time to 2 minutes because it's almost 10 o'clock.
Through you, Chair. So here are the transportation numbers. Last year, we ran a small deficit. This year, we're projecting a much larger deficit. And I'll just preface that this number would be even worse if it wasn't for the fact that OSSA is unable to provide us all the transportation that we need. So you can see the impact of inflation and the impact of the funding formula on the pressure that we're subsidizing with the GSN to provide the current level of transportation support to our students. Next slide. So some considerations and actions here. So OCDSB is currently operating at a deficit funded by the GSN, as I mentioned. Transporting students past our local schools is a common occurrence in this district. The province has developed a new funding formula, creating further financial pressures. The transitionary funding that we're receiving just to provide the level of support that we're providing now, $13.9 million is forecasted to end in the next 3 years. The ministry funding base is not aligned with market rates. And what I mean by that is they give us $56,000 to run a small yellow bus, but an estimates from the market tell us that it's about $72,000 to run that small yellow bus. So even if we were in line with the ministry funding formula, we still have a regional market rate issue that would drive some financial pressure. The ministry funding formula also, OCDSB is an outlier in our use of small vans and solo transportation more than any other school district in this province by a large margin, like not just double, but like 4, 5, 6 times more than other districts. We are looking at within OSTA ways to address that, but it is a problem because the ministry funding formula doesn't provide funding for small vans. That being said, the ministry does acknowledge that boards do use them, and there is a valid reason to have them, and they have indicated that they may adjust future versions of transportation funding formula to consider some usage of those, which would be good for us. OSTA is currently awaiting the Deloitte report, which will provide us a lot more information on an independent view of some of the things that we could do to provide those services better. What changes do we need to make to entitlements to get ourselves back into the funding box? And I guess I continue to request that trustees advocate on the funding formula issue to the province, because no matter how we frame it, there are shortfalls in the funding formula itself. It doesn't address our needs as a district.
All right. Was that all, Associate Director?
That's it.
So you flip a page and I was like, did I cut you off? All right. Thank you for the presentation. I have Trustee Aziz and then Trustee Presley. So we're going to go with Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. Could I kindly ask the first of the two slides be put back on the screen, just for reference. I don't want to misquote the associate director. Okay. Oh, wow. So we're projecting, through you, Chair, we're projecting almost a $3 million deficit when it comes to transportation. Am I reading that correct?
You are reading that 100% correct.
I'm a little bit baffled. And to no fault of the associate director or the manager at the table, at a $2 million deficit when it comes to transportation. My first question is, do we know how many bus routes were affected at the beginning of this school year as a result of the formula change?
Through you, Chair. So no bus routes were affected through the formula change. They gave us what they called transitionary funding, and they held us at last year's funding allocation with some adjustments, meaning they added some things that weren't in there before. But at the end of the day, they provided us an envelope of funding, and they didn't impact the services that we deliver to the students. What caused the route issues was one vendor walked away and didn't sign a contract, and that was 37 routes. And then the other issue is driver shortage. So other routes that we had contracted with third-party vendors, the drivers didn't come back and they couldn't train them fast enough to be ready for the first day of school. That has steadily improved. I think we're at less than 1% now in the number of routes that we're not servicing. But those were the main causes of route disruption for the transportation of our students.
Sorry, to clarify, does this mean that for this upcoming September and the upcoming school year, a $2 million plus deficit in our transportation funding won't impact getting our students to school?
So through you, Chair, we fund this deficit. We have an obligation to fund this deficit through our GSN. So although we have a $3 million pressure, we cover it by our GSN, and OSTA is made whole for the services that they provide us.
Okay. I will go to the second time speaker list, Chair. Thank you for answering my question, Associate Director Giroir.
Okay, you're on the second time speakers list. Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Excuse my ignorance at this question, but when the $13.9 million transitionary funding ends, what are we going to do?
Through you, Chair, that's an excellent question, and that's why one of the comments or actions I made is I think there's going to have to be a hard look at how we deliver programs in this district. I've been talking about this since I got here. The current method the programs that we offer, having us transport kids past our local schools, it's not efficient, it's not sustainable, and if we don't change our behavior, what's going to happen is that $13.9 million would have to come out of the GSN and other areas, which aren't available to us, as we already know. So at the end of the day, we were going to have to make a drastic change. Now, that being said, truth of the matter is, I believe that we'll see some of that transitionary funding back as they implement the small van model. Also, as we've changed the way OSTA provides those services by introducing 18-passenger yellow vehicles to replace small vans, they will be part of the funding model. They already are part of the funding model. So that 13.9 will switch over and we will receive those funds. But again, it takes time to introduce these new things. It's going to take OSTA 2 or 3 years to get up and running and do that. So we're trying to mitigate the amount of transitioning funding we will lose by playing within the ministry's rules on how they fund transportation.
Trustee Presley.
Thank you so much for that. It's very insightful. And I'm being optimistic in that what I think I'm hearing is that we have a lot of opportunities for some savings with our upcoming program review. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we might find some efficiencies that we can implement. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Trustee Scott?
Thank you for highlighting the potential for some savings. And I think for anybody who thinks it's just, just looking at the dollars there, it's not just going to be savings, it's going to be things that are actually better for students. I mean, I look in my own zone right now where we have students who are traveling a huge distance to get to a school that offers French immersion, because there is no school in their immediate area that's big enough to be a dual track school. And so we're busing those kids a significant distance. Yet at the same time, we are trying to serve students in the English program. We are trying to serve students in special education programs. And because of the way we deliver our special education programming, we have students who are traveling huge distances. And it's not just a matter of, you know, we could do it a little more efficiently here and there. Literally the road design in the rural areas is not always conducive to efficient transportation because there are too many places where you can't get there from here. And I well remember the year that my son's bus, which was already picking him up at 20 after 7 to get to Bell High School for 8:45. It was also taking students to Sergai, but one additional student was on that bus, and that added nearly 30 minutes to the bus route length in terms of time, because it was on one of those dead end roads way off in the distance. And that was simply the amount of time it took to travel to that one address and get back again onto the main road. And the challenge for our rural students particularly is that they have no choice because there is no usable public transit
Trustee
in
Scott,
any of that area.
I'm afraid you've hit the
So
time.
what can we do to look at shifting more of our resources into places which are efficient? Because my understanding is that the public transit option is actually less expensive. And it also, I believe, is quite heavily subsidized by the province in terms of, for the city. It's not all coming out of our local taxes and city taxes.
Through you, Chair. We absolutely use public transit where we can, and it's funded dollar for dollar through the funding formula. So, but they have some of the same issues and some of the same limitations as we do as far as being able to provide all the service we would like. But ASA aggressively negotiates with OC Transport to provide us services to those that can be provide services. And it was one of the main ways we helped alleviate some of the bus driver shortages and canceled routes, was to move students where we could to OC Transpo. So it was, and we will continue to do that because it's dollar for dollar funded, and it does allow us to use the capacity that we have in the system to meet the needs of those students who don't have other options.
And the last thing I'd like to ask, if I may, is about bell time reviews, because that's the other place where we may be not as efficient as we could be. We haven't done any for a while now.
Through you, Chair, I don't know if that requires a comment, but I agree with you. We need to do some bell time reviews. I'm not sure the savings are going to be there as much as we think they're going to be there, because at the end of the day, we transport, we've clogged up all the bell time with routes and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that there's not some efficiencies. You know, we could squeeze an extra 10% out of the system, especially in those areas that we don't have secondary options for. That's an area for improvement, and it's on ASA's list of things to do.
Okay. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I think our priority is to do a program review. With all due respect, I don't think we can do a program review and a bell time review all at the same time. But I'll say the same thing about transportation that I've said about other things. In order to make significant change that's going to be meaningful, tough choices have to be made, and people will be upset by those choices. And that's the bottom line at the end of the day. Are we going to have the courage to make the decisions that will benefit our students in the long run? And as far as, and I think it's great. I'm a big supporter of public transportation, and I know that many of the students who get to the two high schools I have in my zone get there by OC Transpo, and unlike city councilors who got to grill the chair of our former manager of OSTA, I've never had the opportunity to speak to the manager of OC Transpo, and if I did, I'd be respectful. But OC Transpo also has challenges getting drivers, and while it's great that we've, all these students have bus passes, it's not that great if they don't actually get to school either. And I do get a lot of complaints from my constituents and the students and families that the service isn't up to what it should be. We pay for those passes just like every customer of OC Transpo, and the service that our students get should be on par with the people who go downtown to work get, because we're paying just as much. Obviously a student rate, but we are paying for them, and OSTA is one of the biggest customers of OC Transpo. So again, it's one thing to parch out the numbers. It's not been a big secret that we overspend our transportation budget. It's been like this for a significant amount of time. And
Blackburn, you're out of time. You could finish your sentence.
Yeah, I think I made my point.
Okay. Does staff want to have a comment?
No comment.
Okay. That takes me to Ms. Claudine Santos.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about the comment on that final slide where there was encouragement to pursue further advocacy at the provincial level. I'd like to understand, please, how the PIC or other parents have been involved in that advocacy, because I think it's very important that we've got that kind of representation at those tables to ensure that the ministry is understanding the full impact of the policy changes that they've been making.
I'm going to hand that off to the director.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the question. I think there's a number of vehicles through which parents, guardians, caregivers can advocate or express their concerns, whatever it may be. Parent Involvement Committee, no question, is one of them. I do think reaching out to the ministry, expressing concerns or perspectives on the experiences parents, guardians, and caregivers are experiencing is another factor. There's no question, as many of the trustees and staff have mentioned, our own program review is going to be an important element in this, and a high impact aspect. It's not playing at the edges of some of the funding formulas. It's more a relook at some of the way we conduct business. And as Chair Scott mentioned, it's not solely for transportation purposes. There's a number of other factors that I consider more important, but transportation definitely benefits from that kind of a review. So I think there's multiple methods through which parents can express their concerns, including our existing committees as well as the ministry itself.
Following up on the director's comments, I will say that other statutory committees of the OCDSB have written letters to either the minister or to their counterparts at other districts. And if PIC wanted to take on that work and write a letter either to the ministry or to the minister or to other PICs, that is another avenue that PIC can get involved with.
Can I ask a supplementary then?
Yeah, go ahead.
There is a difference between a letter writing campaign and submitting some sort of feedback online versus having a kind of coordinated advocacy effort where trustees and perhaps members of different groups such as PIC go to Queen's Park and have sit-down meetings with the minister and with other kind of key ministers in the provincial government and work hard to push forward an agenda that we have all kind of agreed to that will help benefit the lives of our students and our families. And so I wonder if that type of advocacy work has happened. Is there a history of us doing that kind of coordinated GR work together?
I'm going to hand you off to the chair of the advocacy committee. Trustee Milburn. Oh, sorry, Trustee Aziz.
Okay, you guys have frozen, so I'm gonna wait for it to unfreeze.
Trustee Aziz. I don't think Trustee Aziz can hear us, so I'm going to hand it off to Trustee Scott. Trustee Scott.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the question. The board has historically participated in a wide variety of advocacy efforts. In some cases, we have met with local representatives who have good, strong voices when they are at Queen's Park. In some cases, we have set up meetings with the minister, which are not always easy to get, but we do that when we have a good reason and a real need. We participate in the provincial consultations on their budget and make sure that we also are in touch with other school boards through our Provincial Public School Boards Association, which itself has an advocacy day at Queen's Park, where board members from many different boards go with a concerted effort around the key topics that boards have identified, things like funding for special education, replacement staff, student transportation, the very things that we are talking about in this room tonight. So yes, there are a lot of opportunities to do that, but we try very hard to make sure that we are reaching the right people and having the right consistent messages.
Chair, can you hear me now?
I am going to go back to Claudine in case she has anything else she wants to ask. But yes, we can hear you.
Thanks, Chair. I'd be interested in hearing from Trustee Aziz if she's able to just build a little bit on that advocacy piece, because I still think that we maybe are missing an opportunity. I'm just thinking back, Chair, to when there were some changes with regards to the way that we handle autism in this province. And I can't, and sorry, just for background, I'm a former president of the Ontario Parents for Visually Impaired Children. And so I understand the power and importance of parent advocacy at these tables. And so I'd like to just know a little bit more about how parents are able to support the effort on that advocacy piece that was brought up by board staff, so that we can see the change that we need for our kids.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to Trustee Aziz, but you've run the time, so I'll put you back on the list if you're interested.
I think after Trustee Aziz speaks, I should be good to not go on second round. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Trustee Aziz. We could just hear you and now we can't. So whatever you have done, undo it. Trustee Aziz?
Hello?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay. Thank you for confirming. I apologize. I must not have pleased the technology gods. Thank you for your question, Claudine. As the chair of advocacy, there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes that we're preparing to bring back to board to advocate on a number of areas that the board has seen a greater need for funding, including special education. One thing we recommend, of course, to parents and as mentioned by Chair Lyra, that letter writing campaigns and emails to your representatives at all levels are
extremely helpful in elevating that message. So when we send letters to the province or we send letters to the minister, it is well supported by letters from parents and from committees like PIC. So I strongly encourage you to write letters, multiple letters advocating for improved special education funding on the autism program and other issues that PIC decides it wants to write to the ministry about. So hopefully that answers your question. And please don't hesitate to reach out to myself to discuss advocacy efforts in the future if needed.
Okay. That takes us to the end of our first time speakers list. Seeing no further hands, I'm going to go to our second time speaker, Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. However, I see Trustee Bell's hand up, and I believe she would be a first-time speaker.
She would. Trustee Bell?
Thank you very much to all of my trustee colleagues around the table for some very important questions and discussions, and thank you to staff for all their work behind the scenes on this. My question at the beginning of this meeting, we did a territorial land acknowledgement and recognized the importance of reconciliation. And I'm hopeful that going forth with these discussions that we're having pertaining to the budget, that staff can come prepared with a lens, an equity lens to all of these discussions so that we can see how Indigenous peoples are being affected by the decisions and the issues that we face, and then as well all of the equity seeking groups, how our decisions will have an impact on them. Can I get a comment from the director on that, please?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. Appreciate Trustee Bell's question. One of the pieces that will be before us in our visioning out programs and services over the next 5 to 10 to 25 years will be very much based on that equity lens. One of the concerns, and it applies to transportation and the multitude of programs we're running. As I said to the board in an earlier board meeting, you know, the very first school I went to in August of this past, the start of this school year, had over 82% of the students not going to that school, bypassing that school to go somewhere else. And when I think of the fallout of that, a return to community-based schooling is a key driver. And I think one of the things in the program review process, especially at the elementary level, where I think is part of the greatest struggle we have, and a lot of the transportation issues we've been talking about, it is some of the unintended streaming we're doing at the earliest stages in our district by going to a multitude of programs, and there's a fallout of that process. So all to say, I know it's not the topic for this evening, but in answer to your question, one of the elements in our work forward on the program review process, in particular elementary, will be to look at that through an equity lens, in addition to a number of other lenses, pedagogical, transportation, other, that I think will help the overall work of the district in addressing some of the big issues we've been facing for quite some time with big impact, rather than what sometimes I feel is sort of working away at the edges of things, but still having an underlying core problem that appears and reappears year after year. So without pulling us off of tonight's topic onto another one, that will be at the heart of the work we'll be doing through our visioning.
Thank you for your response, and through you, Chair. What I'm trying to relay right now is the importance of bringing that equity lens to every conversation. So how does the conversation on OT costs affect equity-seeking groups? How does the transportation conversation affect equity-seeking groups? And how could the decisions that we make impact various equity-seeking groups? That's more along the lines. So I'm hopeful that in future conversations that we have on all of the components, especially the needs-based analysis components that we have agreed to come back to this board with, that we will be able and come prepared to speak to those impacts.
Trustee Bell, you are out of time.
Okay.
Would you like to go back on the second time speakers list?
Just quickly, I really hope that we get a Q&A started as soon as possible so that we can keep track of these important conversations and questions that are coming up. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, the director has noted that. Any other first-time speakers? Seeing none, that takes us to our second-time speakers list. Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with the comment from Trustee Bell about the Q&A being started sooner rather than later. I also want to highlight that while I appreciate the material coming to us tonight, it would be helpful to get it just a little bit earlier to make sure that we can prepare questions and even send them in advance to the wonderful staff working with Manager Terry and Associate Director Giroir so that they can prepare as well questions and answers and so forth. And my last question for the evening, hopefully, and excuse my ignorance, Associate Director Giroir, you mentioned that we're anticipating or OSTA is anticipating a Deloitte report. Can I ask what is the goal with the report that is coming to OSTA from Deloitte? Is it to examine where the funding shortfalls are? Is it to examine inefficiencies with the way that the funding is distributed through OSTA? Like, I want to get a better understanding of that, please and thank you.
Through you, Chair. So the report is to examine, and I don't have the contracted verbiage right in front of me, but it's to look at all of the operations of OSTA to see how OSTA could operate more effectively and efficiently. It will look at certain parts of the ministry funding formula and benchmarks and stuff like that. I don't know if you're going to see bold statements from the Deloitte report, but there will certainly be some indicators of areas that OSTA, that will be within our control, that OSTA could do to improve its efficiency and provide better service. And we've already recognized a lot of those things on our own and are already moving in those directions. But I think we'll get more support from that report to continue to move in that direction. And there may be some additional ones that we're not considering that will pop out of that report. But I don't think they're going to directly point to the ministry's funding formula.
That's actually really, really helpful to understand what's coming our way. I appreciate your answers to questions this evening.
Okay. Seeing no other. Justine's hand is back up. Trustee Bell. Was that a vestigial hand?
Lagging hand, thanks.
Okay. Seeing no other speakers, I have a couple of quick questions. My first question is that I've seen a number of emails from concerned parents about behavior on buses that haven't been addressed. And one of the solutions that has frequently been floated has been hiring a monitor of some kind to sort of go with the bus to make sure that the bus driver is not having to double up being a disciplinarian or making sure the students are acting appropriately as well as drive the bus. And I'm wondering if that has been analyzed or what the cost for that might be.
Through you, Chair. So we're not specifically talking bus monitors, but we have been talking code of conduct or whatever you would call that for bus behavior. And it's not meant to be like a disciplinary type thing, but it's maybe an educational piece like bus safety. We need to talk about bus behavior, and we need to start to incorporate those kinds of role modeling into teaching kids on how to use the bus responsibly and what their responsibilities are on the bus. So I know OSTA's in that's definitely within the purview with some of the things they want to do, and it's directly related to driver retention, right? We have our drivers who are basically putting their hands up and saying, "I'm done. I can't do this. I can't do it safely. I can't stand this or that." So absolutely. an important concern that the drivers have raised and makes sense for us to get involved in, and OSTA is doing something about it.
Can we include an estimate for the cost about bus monitors so that it's something that we can consider?
Through you, Chair, I think that's something we'd have to take to the OSTA board and discuss. It wouldn't be mine to take alone, but we can certainly do that. I know one of the considerations is cameras on board buses to monitor behavior and not just that, but actually who's on the bus from a safety perspective. Did every child who's expected to get on the bus or get off the bus? There's a lot of things that are going on in that realm. So I just, I don't want to speak on behalf of OSTA. I think that, we could take those concerns to OSTA and see what they say.
My other line of questioning is around active transportation. As a four-season cyclist, I'm a big fan of active transportation, and I'd love to see us reinvigorate that conversation. I know that we ended the walking school bus program. I know that we have not had the same level of support for other creative initiatives to make sure the students are walking to school. And I'm wondering what funding exists or what budgetary pressures caused those kinds of things to stop that we might be able to look at re-enabling in the future.
Through you, Chair, I'd have to take that back to the OSTA. I can't speak specifically about the walking program, but absolutely, it makes sense for a couple of reasons. One, it's good for kids, right? Right off the bat. Two, startup of the year is probably one of the most transitionary times as far as getting bus driver shortages and things like that. So if we could take a couple buses off the road or not have to worry about putting a couple buses on the road while we were running some of these programs, it would certainly help with the transition of getting students back on to the buses or having buses available when they needed them and not when they didn't need them, right? So it certainly makes sense, and I like the suggestion, and I will take it back to the board and see where we are with some of those programs, because I do think it has a strong possibility of being part of the solution going forward. I'm going to make one quick comment. I know I'm answering questions and it's not related to that question, but I spoke most of the night here, and my general manager of finance produced a lot of this reports and stuff, and she would like to have some concluding remarks, if that's okay, at some point when you're done.
Yeah. Does he have a hand?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just a comment to add to Associate Director Giroir's piece. A program review process that centers community-based schools will also contribute to the kind of initiative that Trustee Lyra is speaking to in terms of permitting more walking connection to school versus bypassing the local school to go to another school, which almost makes walking logistically impossible. So I think there's a lot of factors that will or could combine potentially in a synergy, as Trustee Presley said earlier, of some of the work we have ahead of us that will accomplish many things in one effort.
Thank you. My final comment before I turn it over to, oh my goodness, Terry, what's your last name? Terry. Before I turn it over to Terry, is I heard from no less than 4 trustees about the difficulty of working with things on the fly when we don't have written materials in advance. Even if the last thing you have to do is send out the PowerPoint and just put that in the package, even that is something to work from. Even that is helpful, because there were pages of numbers that we were having to try and look at and squint at the screen, and that can be very difficult for us to try and formulate good questions on the fly. And so I'm going to echo the other 4 trustees that have said it, that we really do need these things in advance. And then Terry, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. That sort of is, I'm going to sort of discuss what you have just introduced. And so I wanted to sort of discuss my team. I run 4 departments. My team is not immune to the issues that other departments and schools are having. We are experiencing significant turnover, recruiting issues, absenteeism, high stress levels. So I'd like to put to the table that my team is a dedicated group of people and we absolutely believe in advocacy. I believe in advocacy and I want my team, we want to participate in this because we care about our students and we care about the system we work for. I'm asking that when we pull together what it is that we are wanting to do, what we want to communicate to our Ministry of Education, that we work together. I think that we need to ask ourselves what kind of information will produce the most, the biggest impact for our students. And sometimes interesting to know, good to know, takes a lot of time. Our data management is getting better, but we are not there yet. It takes a lot of time and energy of my staff to pull this together, and we are happy to do it. But I think we need to understand that we do have limitations. And so when we make decisions, let's make good decisions that the information we are providing will do what we need it to do, and make sure that we are getting every cent that is owed to us and more. So thank you for letting me take that time.
Thank you. That takes us to the end of item 6.3, which brings us to new business. Is there any new budget business? Trustee Blackburn.
I'd just like to acknowledge that I agree with you wholeheartedly and I appreciate your words and I will take heed and I hope others do too. Thank you.
Seeing no new business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming and we will see you at the next budget meeting.